Hello and welcome to the School Leadership Show. I am co-host Jenn David Lang. Unfortunately, Mike couldn't make it today, but with me here today is none other than Charles Duhigg, a household name by now. But if you don't know him, he's an award-winning journalist. He's written for the New York Times, the New Yorker, and he's particularly well known in our community, the education community, for his books, The Power of Habit, Smarter, Better, Faster, and now his new one, Supercommunicators. All books that help educational leaders with skills we desperately need, right? Like how to have better habits, set better goals, help teams succeed, and more. And now we have Supercommunicators, which will help us communicate, connect, address conflicts. Now that I say this out loud, I don't know if you intended all the alliteration there, Charles. No, I'm personally very excited to have you here, not just because I summarized the power of habit for the main idea for school leaders 10 years ago this month, November of 2015.
Wow.
But also it's a book that has really fueled my own personal and professional interest in habits. So thank you. I have many habits thanks to you. And okay, with all of that, welcome, Charles. Glad you're here.
Thank you for having me. This is such a treat. And thank you for the kind words.
Yes, of course. Well, we're here, of course, to talk about your latest book, Supercommunicators, How to Unlock the Secret Language of Connection, published just this year at the very beginning.
Yeah.
And what a year to talk about communication, connection, conflict, given the US elections, the world scene. I'm sure everybody wants your time, so thanks for being here. But I'd really like to zero in on how this book is particularly useful for school and district leaders who have plenty of their own needs to communicate well, connect with people, navigate conflict without going to the outside world. So
Yeah.
yeah.
I think it's really important for school leaders and district leaders. In fact, I'd mentioned before we started recording that we're just about to release this teacher's guide for super communicators. And I was writing the letter to sort of welcome people to downloading it. And one of the things that really struck me is schools are where we learn to live in a democracy, right? Schools are where we learn to have conversations with people who we don't necessarily agree with, who come from different backgrounds. Schools are the laboratory that have made America work.
Yeah.
And so learning, not only embodying those great communication techniques yourself, but teaching them to our students is one of the noblest things we can do, because what we're preparing them for is we're preparing them, and teachers know this far better than I do. My wife is a teacher, is that we're preparing them to share their ideas with the world, and more importantly, or as importantly, to hear other ideas that they might embrace, ideas that might be discomforting, but to sit with all of them and to learn to think. So I think communication is a huge part of teaching.
Yeah, you could say we're raising the next generation of super communicators if we do it well.
That's my hope, right? Yeah, and the world is conspiring against us a little bit right now.
A little bit. So we're going to talk a little bit about how leaders themselves can be better super communicators. But to begin, one of the things I have a hard time believing that you say in this book is that this book comes from your own failures of communication. Now, you are a multiple award-winning journalist, and all you do is communication. So really, how have you failed at communication?
Oh, absolutely. So one of the reasons I wrote this book is I got into this bad pattern with my wife where I would come home from work, and like it'd be a long day, and I'd start complaining about, my boss doesn't appreciate me and my coworkers don't realize what a genius I am. And my wife very, very reasonably would offer some good advice. She'd say something like, why don't you take your boss out to lunch and you guys can get to know each other? And instead of hearing what she was telling me, I would get even more upset. And I would say, like, why aren't you supporting me? You're supposed to be outraged on my behalf. Why are you taking his side instead of my side? She would get upset because I was attacking her for giving me good advice.
Yeah.
And so I think this happens in every relationship, right? Yeah. We know this pattern, and I knew this pattern, and I kept on falling into it. And so I actually went to these experts, these neuroscientists, and this is how the book started. And I asked them, like, why do I keep making the same mistake? Not just at home, but, at work, when I was with my coworkers. And they said, well, actually, it's a good thing you came right now, because we're living through this golden age of understanding communication. Right. For really the first time in history, we can watch what happens inside a person's brain as they're having a conversation. And what we've learned is that we tend to think about a discussion as being about one thing, right? We're talking about an upcoming test or your grades or where to go on vacation or my day. But actually they said every discussion is made up of different kinds of conversations, right? And these conversations, they tend to fall into one of three buckets. There's practical conversations where we're making plans or solving problems. There's emotional conversations where I might tell you what I'm feeling, and I don't want you to solve my feelings. I want you to empathize and tell me that you understand. And then there's social conversations, which is about how we relate to each other and the identities that are important to us. And what they said is, what we've discovered is if two people are having different kinds of conversations at the same moment, it's almost impossible for them to fully hear each other. And it's definitely impossible for them to feel connected. And that's what was happening with my wife and myself. I was having an emotional conversation. She was having a practical conversation. They're both equally legitimate conversations, but because we were having different ones, we couldn't really hear each other.
So she should have asked you, do you want to be helped, hugged, or heard? That great
exactly. Which is exactly.
You give that example for like if a student, let's say, came up to a teacher, right, upset, we don't know why, before you start jumping into problem solving, which is what a lot of educators do, that really, if we had this magical question, more alliteration here, do you want to be helped, hugged, or heard? And I was noticing that those map to the three different kinds of conversations that you suggested, right? The helped is the first kind of conversation, the practical one about decision-making, the hugged, right? How do you feel?
Is the emotional,
emotional. And then the third one, do you want to be heard? The, the social one about identity or relationship.
Yeah, that sometimes when a kid comes up, they just say, I want you to know something about me, right? I don't, it's not emotional for me, and I don't need you to solve this. I just want you to understand how I see myself, or how I see myself in comparison to this group of other kids. And it's really important that we show kids that we acknowledge when they need to be heard as opposed to helped or hugged.
Now, that's one thing for kids, but if we're talking about principals and superintendents, talking to other adults, we don't tend to say to people, do you want to be helped, hugged, or heard, right? And so
they'll call HR, right? Like it's not the right questions to be asking for a coworker.
No.
But there is another way of doing this, right? Instead of using this sort of catchphrase, what we can do is we can ask questions. Questions that reveal someone's mindset. But they have to be the right kinds of questions.
So could we go through one at a time? The different.
Absolutely.
Go ahead.
Well, so they kind of all. So within psychology, these are known as deep questions, right? And they're questions that ask you about your values or your beliefs or your experiences. And that can sound a little intimidating, right? Like I have to have this like meaningful conversation with, but it's as simple like if somebody comes up and they tell you that they're a doctor, instead of saying, oh, what hospital do you work at? Asking, oh, what made you decide to go to medical school? Right? That second question invites them to tell us who they are.
So let me ask you a couple questions about that.
Okay.
First of all, so what you're getting at is that it's not the goal of the conversation isn't the content, but it's how you make people feel, and you want people to feel connected. Is that what you're getting at here?
That's definitely part of it. I mean, the content is important, right? Like, and sometimes we have conversations where it's just like, I have some information I need to give you, or we need to make a decision together. But for the most important conversations, and about half our conversations fall into this category, we also have conversations to feel connected to someone else. And that connection is really important. And matching and asking deep questions allows us to achieve that connection.
And I noticed in the book, for those questions that are about the emotions, the how do you feel, you dedicated 3 chapters to to those, whereas only one to the decision making, which I think those of us in leadership positions in schools, we think, oh, so many of the conversations are about that. So let's start there with the how you connect when you're talking about emotions. And you share an anecdote about interviewing Nick Epley, the psychologist and researcher. But somehow when you went in to ask him questions, he ended up turning it around and asking you questions. And so I thought that was very cool. And so what did Nick Epley do to connect with you so easily or well?
Honestly, he asked deep questions, which means instead of asking me about the facts of my life, He
Yeah.
asked me how I felt about my life. And you're exactly right. The point you made before about everyone listening to this is a leader. And so their default oftentimes is going to be that practical conversation, right? It's the place that our brain often goes at work. And yet that's a habit. And sometimes we use practical language when what we're actually talking about are emotional topics, right? If we sit down and we're having a meeting about our budget, and I'm saying, look, we got to cut some dollars here and we got to cut some dollars there, and you're pushing back a lot and you're saying, no, I think we should cut over. What might be going on is that you're really trying to tell me, I do not want to lay my people off. Like, I don't want to have layoffs. I feel really anxious right now that if we don't make the right choice, it's going to result in some people losing their jobs. Now, we don't necessarily have to have what sounds like an emotional conversation to discuss that. We can use practical language, but that is an emotional conversation. And unless we surface it, unless we say, look, I hear that you're anxious about layoffs. I want you to know my goal is to avoid layoffs at all costs. Let's work together to figure out where to cut in the budget. Can we turn to the numbers? Is that okay? What I've done in that case is I've said, I hear your emotional conversation. I'm going to match a little bit your emotional conversation.
Yeah.
I promise I'm not dismissing it. Do I have your permission to move to a practical discussion for just a couple of minutes? Because I think it's going to help us understand what's going on. When we do that, we become aligned.
And then bring it back to the emotional. Because yeah, I guess I was trying to understand, where do these intimate kinds of questions fit in a professional setting? So to
let me ask you a question. Why do you do this podcast? Like, what do you like about the podcast?
Well, I feel passionate that school leaders and district leaders are so busy that they don't often have time, no offense, to read all the great books out there and get all the great ideas. So I'm trying to connect them with the best ideas in education so that they can do a better job supporting teachers and students.
So the question I asked was a deep question, because I was basically asking you, like, why do you do the thing you do? How do you feel about the thing you do? And the answer you gave me told me so much about you, right? It told me that you genuinely care not only about education, but about leaders, that you understand their lives, that they're very, very busy. My guess is you're also very, very busy, that you're someone who likes big ideas, that you think big ideas are useful to us and that we can use them as tools. So I think it's not hard to ask these questions that end up being intimate questions. They don't often sound like intimate questions.
Right.
But I think this lesson, instead of asking you about the facts, like, how many podcasts have you done? When did you start doing the podcast?
Right.
Like, do you always do it on Fridays?
Right.
Those are about the facts of your life. Those won't tell me much about you. But if I ask you how you feel about your life, why do you do the podcast? Right. Why are we doing it on Friday? Is this your set aside day that you get to like enjoy and kick up your heels a little bit?
Conversation with Charles Duhigg.
Exactly.
Can I give an example? So let me give you an example. So I taught a long time ago before being in this position, and we used to ask more subjective questions, and now we've moved a little bit more toward data and checklists. So principals go and they observe teachers, as you know, right? So should principals be moving back toward the kind of questions that I remember principals asking me? How did you feel about the lesson you taught, Charles? Like, should we be bringing those, as opposed to, here's the checklist, here's the data, this is what you did and you didn't do? Do you think it's time to
so here's what I would say. It's actually every good conversation has all three kinds of conversations in it.
Ooh.
So why should we start with a question like that? Not necessarily because what you tell me is so essential, but because it helps us get aligned, right? If I have a checklist for you, here's a bunch of suggestions. It's great to have those suggestions, but what's most important is, can you hear what I am telling you? No matter how clearly I'm saying it, can you actually absorb it? And the way to make sure that you can absorb it is to do a check-in where I figure out, where are we both, like, what mindset are we in? Like, if I ask you, tell me, like, how did you think that class went? What was something that you thought went really well in that class and something that didn't go as well, right? The teacher answering might be really practical and might say, like, I saw Jimmy's looking off into space and I knew that I needed to talk to him a little bit more. Okay, they're in a practical mindset. But it might be someone saying, well, I was teaching math today, and like, I remember learning math myself, and it was really anxiety producing to be in a math class and not understand. So the thing I kept on thinking about was like, go slow enough for the kids who weren't getting it. Okay, that person's in a more emotional mindset, or possibly even a social mindset. Maybe they're thinking about, disadvantages that some of the kids have socially.
Mm.
And then the principal can say, I completely understand what you're saying. Like, I have felt the same way myself. And
Mm.
I know that this is, it sounds like we share a goal, which
Yeah.
is giving kids the best experience possible. I want to return to that, but
Mm.
can I go through the checklists? Can I
Mm.
go through the practical conversation? Can I go through the checklist of things that I noticed that I think might help us achieve that goal?
I love
At that
that.
moment, we're aligned
Yes.
and we can hear each other.
I love that. I want to point something out because I'm anticipating the skeptical leaders who are saying, this sounds well and good for your conversations, Charles, with your wife, right? But I'm very busy. I observe, I hope to do 500 observations a year, right? I don't have time for this, right? But what you're saying is, if you just go to the checklist, the teacher's not going to have the buy-in. They're not going to change their practice. So that's really wasting your time. And that
That's
actually,
exactly right.
so for people who are tuning out thinking, what is this? This, I don't have time for this. So I find that very helpful.
And by the way, it's very fast. It usually takes about 45 seconds to become aligned in a conversation.
Yeah.
Because it all has to do with that. If I sit down and I say, okay, look, I thought you did a good job, but here's all the things you did wrong, versus saying, what did you think went well and what didn't go well? And
Yeah.
you answer that question for 30 seconds. Then I say, oh, I understand. I had the same experience. That takes 15 seconds. Now, can I tell you what I think you did? Could have gone better, right? Like that
Right.
alignment, you're wasting your time if you're
Yeah.
not achieving alignment.
Yeah. I was wondering about for you, can you share a most memorable teacher from your K-12 experience? Do you have a
Oh,
minute?
probably. So I had two teachers, one named Miss Buttercup, who I just loved because of her name,
That's
and a woman
literally
named
her
Miss.
name. Yeah.
Her name was Miss Buttercup. Yeah, yeah. I grew up in Albuquerque, New Mexico, and Miss Tyson. Miss Tyson was my third grade teacher. She had a couple of adopted kids with mental challenges,
Hmm.
or cognitive and learning challenges, and one of them was deaf. And so she had learned sign language, and she taught us sign language. And I think like lots of kids learn sign language, but it was such an empathy, because it was never about, these kids are disabled. It was about, I have to talk to my kids a little bit differently. But it's fun to learn how to talk to someone differently, right? It's fun to learn how to sign. It's fun to learn how to take an idea and make it something that someone else can absorb. So I loved Miss Tyson. She was just wonderful.
And it sounds like she went a bit outside the curriculum. Obviously, teaching you some sign language was not there. So she was just connecting with, yeah.
Probably. It was also the 80s, 70s and 80s. And
Yeah.
so I think
So that
curriculum
was
standards were
really
a
one
little
of
bit
my
less
questions for the
strict.
podcast, but I was timing to see how long it would take. So I asked you that personal question about what, memorable teacher. So just to let people know, that started at 21 after the hour. It's now 22 after the hour. So that was one.
Right. So a minute. And I feel so close to you. I feel like you know something about me now. Right. And if I was really good, I would ask you the same question back.
Yes.
And, or even better, and this is the brilliance of deep questions, you could answer your own question and it'll seem really natural. You could say like, oh, Miss Tyson sounds great. I had a teacher in third grade who was X.
Yes. And I was going to do that because obviously I've read your book, but I and I'm matching your belly laugh, but we'll get into that. But
it's
anyway,
wonderful.
not fair. So I want to ask a little bit. So principals often work with groups of teachers as well, whether it's leading professional learning, staff meetings, team meetings. How hard is it to connect with people, emotionally when it's a group as opposed to one-on-one?
I mean, we're certainly more comfortable when it's one-on-one because we don't feel like we have an audience. But every single study, and I think our own experiences bear this out, in a group, if you commit to that emotional conversation, you can connect with the entire group. Think about when you've been sitting in a group and someone stands up and they just say something vulnerable and real, right? You feel connected to them. And then if whoever's running the meeting says, thank you so much for sharing that with us. Like, I think everyone in this room knows what you are feeling and they feel for you.
Yeah.
Everyone in that room becomes connected. And it's the same basic things, right? Because it's really easy for the leader to say, thank you for sharing that with us. Let's talk about how to solve that problem that you just, right? And not match the emotions, but to just match them a little bit allows everyone to become aligned.
And that
And
word
and
you used,
oh,
vulnerability.
vulnerability is
Rather
key.
than hoping that it happens, it seems like that's an opportunity to use the term check-in as opposed to getting into the what of the meeting. Take a few minutes. You could have people share emotional questions with each other. You share some pretty emotional ones in the book, like when was the last time you cried? I don't necessarily recommend that principals start with that, but you could, in pairs, how about everybody share who was the most impactful teacher and what's a strong memory from K-12, right? And you could have
Absolutely.
planned vulnerability.
And it's important to note what vulnerability is, because sometimes we hear this word and we think of someone crying or talking about trauma. And that's not actually what vulnerability is. Vulnerability has a very specific definition. Vulnerability is essentially a cognitive state that I enter when I tell you something that you could judge. Now, I might not care about your judgment, right? I might tell you I think Star Trek is better than Star Wars, and you think that I'm an idiot for believing that. I don't care. But the fact that I've told you something that you could judge,
Yes.
it triggers this vulnerability instinct in my brain. And if you respond by not judging, if you respond by sharing something of yourself that I could judge, it is impossible for us not to feel closer to each other. The way our brains have evolved, this is a signal that we should feel closer and more trusting.
I haven't heard that definition. I love that. I'm gonna go look that up after. That's brilliant. I like that. So you've shared a couple of strategies that principals could use tomorrow, right? So instead of just asking the what questions, it's almost like a therapist asking, how do you feel about it, right? It's not just,
Yeah.
the take a little bit of time to connect because it will pay off with all of the content and decisions that you need to get to. And then another suggestion that you share, particularly when there's conflict, you suggest this strategy called looping for understanding. Can you describe a
Yeah.
little bit about this strategy?
Absolutely. Absolutely. And so what's important here is that in addition to asking questions and asking deep questions, it's not enough just to listen. We actually have to prove to the other person that we're listening.
Talk
Because
about
particularly if I'm a teacher talking to my principal, there
mm-hmm.
is like this little suspicion in the back of my head. My principal, she's not listening to me. She's just waiting her turn to speak. She's
Yep.
letting me right. And so as the principal, I need to prove that I'm actually hearing you. I'm absorbing what you're saying. And this technique known as looping for understanding is just a really easy way to do it. And they teach it in Stanford and Harvard, all these fancy places. And it has 3 steps. The first step is ask a question, preferably a deep question. The second step is when someone has replied to that question,
Mm-hmm.
repeat back what you heard them say in your own words. And what's important here is not mimicry, but thinking. To
Mm-hmm.
say, like, what I hear you saying is this, and prove that you're actually thinking about it. What I hear you saying is this, and it makes me think of this other thing that you once told me, right? I'm proving to you. And most of us do this intuitively, right? Step 1 and step 2. But step 3, this is the one I always forget, is when you're done, say, ask if you got it right.
Yeah.
Did I hear you correctly? And the reason why that's so powerful is because what I'm really asking is I'm asking you for permission to acknowledge that I was listening.
Mm.
And when you acknowledge that I'm listening, you become so much more likely to listen to me in return.
Mm.
So
So
the first tactic is ask deep questions. Second tactic is prove you are listening.
mm-hmm. Um, I want to get to back to the prove you're listening, but first you had a quote in the book that I really liked now that we're talking about listening. And this is from a Yale psychologist, Margaret Clark. The best listeners aren't just listening, they're triggering emotions by asking questions, expressing their own emotions, and doing things that prompt the other person to say something real. And
Yeah.
I think that's yeah, we're not just listening, we're prompting these emotions. But to get back to what you're saying about proving that you were listening, and it's not just, hey, I was listening. And it isn't, we've often heard, paraphrase. But you give a really great example in the book of Terrence McGuire, who works at NASA or used to
Yeah.
be at NASA, I don't know. And he discovered something about hiring astronauts. And it was very
Yeah.
important to them that astronauts have high EQ, emotional intelligence. We don't want astronauts fighting up there.
Right.
We can't send mediator. So, and this may really help with leaders. I've been talking this week about, hiring teachers for EQ. So can you tell us a little bit about Terrence McGuire and what he found and how it
Yeah.
connects? Yeah.
Yeah, and Terry McGuire, he's unfortunately passed away, but he
Oh, I'm
worked at
sorry.
NASA for I think 28 years. He was the lead psychiatrist for manned space flight. So he's the guy who would interview every single candidate in the final stage and decide which of them could deal with the mental rigors of space.
Yeah.
And you're exactly right. They wanted to start finding astronauts who had more emotional intelligence. The problem is it's really hard to figure out who has emotional intelligence and who can fake it really, really well,
Okay.
particularly among folks who are finalists to be an astronaut. Because usually you have like 2 PhDs, you're really, good looking, you've flown fighter jets, and most importantly, you have been doing interviews your entire life. You
Yeah.
know how to answer every question perfectly.
Yes.
And so NASA was going nuts. They were saying, like, look, we get these people, we think that they have high emotional intelligence, and then we put them up into space. And after 3 weeks, we realize, no, they just faked it really, really well. How do we tell the difference between people who are faking it and people who aren't in the interviews?
Yeah.
Terry McGuire, he works on this for months and months and months, can't come up with any good answers. And then one night he's listening to these old recordings of people who he had interviewed previously that had gone on to be great leaders within NASA. And he suddenly realizes they're laughing differently than everyone else. So he comes up with this new interview technique. What he does is he asks the astronaut to come in, they're sitting in the chair. Terry McGuire walks into the room holding a big stack of papers. And as he's walking in, he spills the papers as if on accident. And then he does
But it's
this
on
weird
purpose.
thing. Right. He's doing it on purpose. Right. Yeah. And then he does this weird thing. He goes like this. I cannot believe I did that. And then he notices how the astronaut reacts. Because we all know what's going on there. Sometimes we make a mistake, like spilling papers. And then in our embarrassment, we kind of compound the mistake by like doing something goofy, like a big goofy laugh. And some of the candidates, they would see him do this and they would go, that's really silly. Let me give you a hand picking those up. And some would go, that is really silly. Let me give you a hand picking those up. The candidates who matched him, what they were really saying was, I understand what you're feeling right now. I want to make you feel better. I want to show that we're both in this boat together. Those were the candidates who had emotional intelligence. And they went on to be some of the best leaders in NASA's history.
So the laughing is another way of saying, I'm listening. I'm paying attention.
Yeah. And actually, this, if you'll notice, so about studies show that about 80% of the time when we laugh, it is not in response to anything funny. Right. I'm not a comedian. You're not a comedian. Most of our friends aren't comedians. And yet we laugh all the time in conversations with them.
Right.
And the question is why? Because when I laugh, it's to show you that I want to connect with you. And when you laugh back, you're showing me that you want to connect in return. Yeah, it's really valuable.
And it might be hard in the podcast, but it was like a belly laugh. Your mouth was really open. And so the idea of matching the other person's mood,
that energy and that
their
intensity,
all
their
of
affect.
That.
Yeah.
We're big in mood meters in the education world, but we don't use it quite that way. But to think about if a teacher comes into your office, right, is crying, has a funny story, to think about matching their mood as a way to make them help them feel heard.
And I think what's important there is thinking about matching in a sort of broad sense, right? So if somebody comes into your office and they're really angry, you know that it's not going to be good to get angry yourself, right? You're just going to, so matching doesn't always mean I have to mimic or replicate you. What it oftentimes means is that I can say to you, you look really, really upset. Tell me what's going on. Like, I want to understand this. This is clearly important to you. I want to take it seriously. Tell me what's going on. Now, when you come in angry, usually your energy is high. And you'll notice what I just did in responding to that person. My energy was high also. Now, if you come in really hot, you're really angry, and I go, oh, you seem really angry. Tell me why you are. You're not going to feel like I'm listening to you. But if I match your energy a little bit, I don't have to match your affect. But if I match your energy, what I'm signaling is I hear what you're saying. Like, this is important. Like, let's work on this together.
These are very original techniques. I appreciate them. I know I don't know you have a lot of time, but I want to get to the kinds of conversations. The third type, the who are we conversations about relationships and identity. How frequent are those kinds of conversations? Are we talking
Those
about?
are actually the most common conversations we have.
Really?
To be
Okay.
honest, yeah, what studies show is that about 80% of our conversations are social conversations, and we don't recognize it usually at the time, right? But if I'm talking to you about, my sister's driving me crazy, or, my mom, I'm really, really worried about her. Those could be emotional conversations, and there's elements of emotion in there. But what's important is that what I'm transmitting to you is I want this is a social conversation because it's about how we relate to each other. Or if somebody says, look, as a woman in this workplace, I think I'm having a different experience than you are. Or as a Christian in this workplace, I think I'm having this is how I see this issue.
Yeah.
What they're signaling is I have an identity that is really important to me.
Yeah.
And that does not mean you need to match my identity. You don't need to tell me that you understand what it's like to be a woman because or a Christian. In a social conversation, what's important is that you acknowledge my identity, that you recognize it. That instead of saying like, oh, well, we're all equal here, or we all probably have some religious background, to say, Paul, like, I want to thank you for sharing that with me. Like, what I hear you saying is that, like, as a Christian, that's a really important identity to you. And there's certain values and obligations that you feel like that infers. Once we acknowledge that identity, we make it part of the conversation, and we take away what's known as identity threat. The feeling that you refuse to acknowledge my identity, or that my identity should be seen as an affront to you. The way we mitigate identity threat is to acknowledge identities. And I'll mention one other thing. What's important in that case is to recognize and acknowledge that we all contain multitudes of identities, right? That when Paul comes in and he says, as a Christian, I see it this way, that the best thing I can say is to say, Paul, I hear you saying that, like, as a man of faith, you have certain values. I also know that you're a teacher, and you're a wonderful teacher. And I know that you're a dad, and I know that you're a little league coach. And I know that each of those hats gives you a slightly different perspective on this. And I'm wondering, like, when you put on all those hats, when I get all of Paul, how does he see this issue? When I recognize the multitude of identities that we all contain, it prevents me from shoehorning you into a corner of just one identity, because nobody likes that. That does not feel good, because it doesn't feel true.
So, and certainly schools are, microcosms of our democracy, our country. So we certainly have a lot of identity conflicts around identity, but also obviously brings a lot of wonderful things to school, the diversity that we have in school, both among staff and students, as well as leaders. So it sounds like you're saying to both acknowledge the differences, but also find ways to find the commonalities, because we're not just one thing.
That's exactly right. Acknowledge the differences, but also acknowledge that we are more than those differences, and acknowledge the things that we have in common. Right.
Yeah.
And I think around race, in the book, there's a lot of, there was this experiment that was done where this woman, Kiara Sanchez, who was then at Stanford, she asked pairs of friends to have conversations, and one friend was Black and one friend was white. And what she did is, in some of the conversations, she asked them beforehand to just say something to each other, to say something like, this is going to be awkward. I know it's going to be awkward. And I might say the wrong thing, and I hope you'll forgive me. And if you say the wrong thing, I promise I'll forgive you. That simply acknowledging that and saying, you probably see things differently because you're Black, but you're also my best friend, and we're fraternity brothers, and we both are econ majors. Just doing that, it makes it so much easier to acknowledge those differences that sometimes seem overwhelming. Because the truth of the matter is, it's just one small difference in a whole field of things that we have in common and that we don't have in common.
Yeah. No, and I think your book does a really great job in helping people prepare for these for conversations that may be hard. On page 220, you have, I don't know, maybe 8 guidelines for hard conversations. And, one of them is, I think, what you're just talking about, acknowledging discomfort, right? This may be
Yeah.
difficult. One of them is talk about guidelines, right? What's out of bounds. So I think for leaders who would like some guidelines on having some difficult conversations, particularly around, identity or relationships, it might be helpful to look at this list of,
Yeah, it's just a checklist of things to think about.
few things to think about. So how do you know? So let's say, I'll give a scenario, right? A teacher comes into the principal's office and says to the principal, this guy on the 8th grade team, he's not pulling his weight. And he's not doing, all of us are working hard and he's not pulling his weight. How do I know as the principal, is this a decision-making conversation, an emotional or a, social relationship conversation?
So, okay, let's role play. You be the teacher, I'll be
Okay.
the principal. Here's the
Okay.
first question I'm going to ask.
Yeah.
I hear what you're saying. Tell me why this is important to you. Like what is it about this that brought you in to talk to me today?
Well, we all decided to plan different parts of the unit, right? So I planned my part, Sheila planned her part, Jose planned his part, and then, John shows up and doesn't plan his part, so we don't have that part of the unit planned. So now the 3 of us, one of us, or all that, we're going to have to do the work for him.
So what I hear you saying, and tell me if I'm getting this wrong, is I hear you saying that there is like a practical issue here, but you also just feel like this is unfair. Like you've done your work and John's not doing his work, and that just doesn't seem fair to you. Am I getting that
I have a
right?
stack of papers to grade. I don't want to do his work. I'm busy.
Okay. And so and I completely understand that. By the way, I I hate it when people sort of dump work on me because they're not doing it. Let's talk about a couple of ways we could address this. But before we talk about actually how to schedule your lesson plans, let's talk about how you can share this with John, because I think it's important that he understand your perspective.
Hmm.
Is there a way that you could say it to him that you think, instead of making him defensive, is going to help him understand? Right? So what I'm doing there is I'm kind of, just by asking this question, why is this important to you? You're
Hmm.
basically telling me what frame of mind you're in, what mindset you're in.
Yes.
And then I'm matching you and I'm saying, look, I totally understand and I want to engage in this.
Hmm.
Let's go through and talk about this social issue,
Mhm.
right? Like there's a social, you have a social problem, which
Mhm.
is not so much that John's not doing his work, but that you're pissed that John's not doing his work because it seems unfair.
Mhm.
How do we communicate with John to help him understand what you're feeling?
So it's not so important to tease out exactly which of it is a little bit of all, as you said earlier, but
It's a
sort of
little bit of all.
asking the question and matching the
Yeah.
mood of the person's emotions.
And oftentimes when we think about things like fairness or justice, we actually think that it's an emotion and it's actually a social conversation. So
Yeah.
these distinctions are a little bit arbitrary, right? The
Right.
goal of them, though, the goal of the 3 buckets is just to cause you to step back and just think a little bit more about what's happening in this conversation. What is this person really trying to tell me? Because
Mm.
sometimes they don't know themselves. Sometimes their words don't, for whatever reason, I'm not hearing them clearly. What are they really trying to say? And in that case, you're not saying come up with a solution that like gets all of our lesson plans done.
Mm.
You're saying I want a solution. I need Paul to pull his weight. That doesn't seem fair to me that he's not. That's the real problem to solve.
So getting at the issue under the issue.
Yeah.
Yes. Okay. So quickly, so principals are busy. They finish this podcast and they're hit by a million things to do. What's one small thing they could do the next day? What's like one small thing out of all that we've
Yeah.
said? If they walk away with
So
one thing, yeah.
so commit to asking at least one deep question that you wouldn't have asked otherwise, right? Start a meeting with, and that doesn't mean it has to be like, oh, what are you looking forward to this weekend? It can be something as simple as like, Cindy, you did a great job this week, and I'm just wondering, like, what was different for you this week? Like, what happened to, or Jim, I know you have a conference coming up. What's exciting to you about the conference? Like, what's going to be the thing that like you're looking forward to? Just doing that people will start to tell you things about how they see the world that you wouldn't access otherwise. And you mentioned this question: when's the last time you cried in front of another person? I give speeches all across the nation,
Yeah.
from audiences 500 to 15,000 people. And I have everyone midway through my speech turn to the person next to them and ask and answer that question.
Oh,
And
no.
everyone thinks they're going to hate it.
Yeah.
And everyone loves it.
Mm.
Because the truth of the matter is, we love having a real conversation. We love sharing something about ourselves and learning something real about someone else.
Yes. Yes. I think what these questions, these deeper questions, are game changers. And I think it's just what schools need right now. So I hope the principals will go out and do that tomorrow or the next day. Thank you. Can you tell us, if people want to learn more about you or your work, where would you like them to go?
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. So I have a website, charlesduhigg.com. That teacher's guide I mentioned will be on the website, and you're free to download it. You're free to use it. There's no cost. It's a PDF.
Oh, great.
And it was written by a couple of academics at Northern Arizona University. And then I have a Substack, a newsletter, if anyone is interested, which you can find at if you just Google Substack Charles Duhigg, it'll come up. But also, if you're interested in buying Supercommunicators or Power of Habit, it's on sale everywhere. It's on Audible if you want to listen to it as an audiobook. It's on Amazon. And equally importantly, it's at your local bookstore. And supporting bookstores, much like supporting teachers, is how we support democracy in America.
I love you. Well, that was Charles Duhigg with How to Unlock the Secret Language of Connection. Thank you so much for your time. This was incredibly valuable. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thanks for listening to this episode of the School Leadership Show, a podcast for aspiring and practicing school leaders. Send your comments, questions, and show ideas to me, Mike, at schoolleadershipshow.com. And please consider rating the podcast in iTunes and leaving a comment. And definitely pass the show along to your colleagues.